Disney made an entire comic line about Disney rides that no longer exist. But were they any good? Let me explain. Unless you've been to Walt Disney World before the year of 1998, I guarantee you that you've never ridden on the ride you see here. And that's because you can't. It doesn't exist anymore. So, if you're Disney, obviously the best way to promote your theme parks is to make comics based on defunct rides and characters that you can no longer see in the parks. Of course, it's genius. So sit back, relax, and stick around for some Disney parks lore I'm sure you have never heard of before. Here is the untold story of Disney Kingdoms. Now, it's a bit difficult to dive into this line of comics without briefly going over the rides that they're based on, so let's take a quick look back at the tragedy of Darth Museum of the Weird, the Wise. When Marvel Comics was purchased by Disney, they were itching to begin producing their own comics based on Disney properties, and decided that the Disney parks would be an interesting area to explore in a comic book format. The series that they chose to start with was called Seekers of the Weird, a comic based on an attraction that never came to be and never existed in the parks in the first place, which I'm actually going to cover more in depth in episode 2 of this series, as it more fits in line with one of the other comics that they produced in the future. So if you're looking to see more content about obscure media, or me reacting to some of your nostalgic favorites for the first time, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that notification bell to know when part 2 drops. Anyways, a comic about a ride that never existed in the parks was a rocky place to start an entire comic book series based on Disney park rides, so the creative team behind Disney Kingdoms decided to pivot to a more recognizable parks character for their second installment, and in 2014 they decided to release Figment as their next installment. If you are unaware of who Figment is, he's sort of the unofficial mascot of Disney's Epcot theme park. That isn't a big ball, at least. And he's been a recognizable face ever since the park's inception. His journey began in the Imagination Pavilion, where he starred in his own ride called The Journey into Imagination. Now, you may have taken a look at this book cover and wondered who this fellow in the top hat is, and you would not be alone in this thought, as I was thinking the same exact thing when I picked this book up. So the Journey into Imagination attraction has had several iterations over the years, with its current version focusing on an exploration of the 5 senses, where the scientists of the Imagination Institute seek to capture and control the power of imagination. And Figment pops in to foil their plan, offering goofy gags and silly sensory effects. It's loud, cheap looking, and overall the premise of mixing a lesson about the 5 senses with the power of imagination just doesn't work very well on a conceptual level. When I went to Epcot a few years back, I walked onto the ride with no wait at around 8 p.m. and the ride didn't leave a particularly good impression on me. You know, when the images on Disney's official website are a random table, a picture of Figment, and a slightly closer picture of Figment, you're gonna be in for a good time. So what gives? Where is our fine top hat wearing friend? Well, in the original Journey into Imagination, Figment is the manifestation of imagination, thought up by a man known only as the Dream Finder. The Dream Finder, alongside Figment, led riders throughout the attraction's different realms of imagination, each themed after art, literature, theater, and science, respectively, showing how imagination can help in all forms of creativity. He's an established character in the Imagination Pavilion's overall lore, complete with a character that would walk around the park, just like your Mickey Mouses or your Donald Ducks. But ever since the ride was closed and replaced, so was Dreamfinder. With this in mind, the comic seemed like a way for Disney to test the waters, so to speak, on expanding the lore of one of the park's earliest and most beloved characters, and let the writers run wild with imagination. Enter Blarion Mercurial, a young inventor studying in 1910 London who is trying to harness the power of human imagination as an alternate energy source, but can't seem to get on the good side of his university's chairman, Mr. Illocrant. After presenting another failed experiment, Blair is able to finally succeed after refining his machine and thinking back to his childhood imaginary friend, Figment, who appears before his very eyes after he recites the first couple of lines of the closing song of the actual attraction, One Little Spark, which is a really good callback to one of the parts of the ride that has maintained itself throughout all of the iterations. While creating a literal figment of his imagination is an incredible scientific breakthrough, it doesn't exactly inspire academic confidence in the cold-hearted faculty of the university, so Blair and Figment worked together to create another version of the machine that the Academy would deem a little bit more successful. The two of them finally succeed, but they succeed a little too well, opening up a mind portal to another dimension and dropping Blair and Figment into a lush, fantastical, and hairy world. Now, while this is happening, the chairman is walking into the room, and in an attempt to shut down the machine, he puts on the helmet apparatus that connects to the imagination machine and yells out that he requires order. This somehow calms the machine down, but in the same instance, a large robotic hand comes out and brings the chairman to the ground. But we'll circle back to this large robotic hand in a second. After dropping into the mysterious landscapes on the other side of the portal, Figment and Blair run into the local fauna of the area, including the cute and very marketable Chimera, and the not as friendly sound sprites, who are like the Avatar people if they spoke in alliteration, which in hindsight is very ironic considering that there's a whole Avatar area of the parks now that kind of overshadows the Imagination Pavilion. I know they're in different parks, but my point still stands. Anyways, the sound sprites capture Figment and Blair because they're ugly. They sound ugly, they look ugly, they smell ugly, probably, and they take our duo to their honeycomb hideout to imprison them for ruining their soundscape with their repulsive reverberations. Inside their cell, they find out that they have been trapped in the realm of imagination, which explains all the weird stuff going on. And the realm of imagination is actually segmented into areas, and the sound sprites are the ones who monitor the audio archipelago. Also inside of their cell, they meet Phi, who is a sound sprite that has bad audio and doesn't fit into the ideal soundscape that the sound sprites work so hard to maintain, and he joins our ragtag group of heroes for the rest of the story. Using the power of imagination, the group escapes and meets back up with Chimera, only to fly straight into the Nightmare Nation, which, as far as I can tell, is the only location somewhat based on the original attraction, specifically the literature section that I talked about earlier, which has a lot of nods to horror authors such as Edgar Allan Poe. This makes it the perfect backdrop for our characters to get separated and tested, as we see Blair floating down into the void on a Tales of Terror book, which is ripped straight from the original attraction. The Nightmare Nation acts as sort of a personification of the voice inside of Blair's head, convincing him briefly that the pursuit of imagination is pointless. However, Figment finds Blair and convinces him to become the Dream Finder. He said the thing! And this allows him to save his new friends and channel enough energy to return home. Happy ending, right? Well, remember when I told you to remember the large robotic hand? Yeah, so apparently when Dreamfinder and the gang were off in the realms of imagination, the chairman accidentally unleashed a robot army upon London, and only Dreamfinder can stop them. This is where we find out the origins of the Dream Machine that we saw in the original attraction, and Dreamfinder uses the Dream Machine to drop dream wrenches upon the people of London so they can start dismantling the robots. However, the leader of these robots, the Singular,
I am what the humans call thick,
is too powerful to be defeated by dream wrenches. So, in a heroic act, Dreamfinder and Figment open a portal and take all the robots with them, saving England but sealing themselves away forever. With the portal closed, Phi and Chimera stay back with the chairman, presuming that Dreamfinder and Figment are dead. And the final shot of the comic shows Dreamfinder and Figment floating on towards Spaceship Earth, or in Disney adult terms, the big Epcot ball. So, there's our origin story for Dreamfinder and Figment. And it seems like the story of the book flows right into the story of the original ride itself, but the comic actually sold out a couple print runs and became a sleeper hit, and I can see why, honestly. The comic is fun, plain and simple, and I'd actually recommend you try and find a copy yourself to form your own opinion on it, as it's probably one of the easiest ones to find out of the Disney Kingdoms line, and is a pretty accessible starting point. The comic does a good enough job of capturing the original spirit of the ride, with each issue taking place in a different realm of imagination, and gives a compelling enough backstory to a character that could really use more time in the Disney spotlight. Another fun note is that Figment's personality was sort of combined from all of his previous iterations, making him spunky and sarcastic like in the current iteration of the ride, while maintaining his original positive, imaginative spirit. However, when Disney see things make money, Disney make more of things that make money. Introducing Figment 2, the cleverly named sequel to Figment the First, which picks up right back where we left off when the first series ended. Dreamfinder and Figment land in their new surroundings next to some buildings that look suspiciously like the Imagination Pavilion, where the Journey to Imagination ride takes place in the Epcot Park. That's right, this is a time travel story, baby. Where Dreamfinder and Figment travel 100 years into the future to the academy that Blair worked at in the first book, but this time on their Florida, USA campus. Look, it's a little goofy, but if this is how they want to establish a continuity with the parks, so be it. Surrounded by new technology and a new chairman, Dreamfinder is overwhelmed by all these new things. And the students and chairman are overwhelmed by the fact that a guy who died 100 years ago is standing in front of his own memorial. Just as the new chairman is about to kick Dreamfinder and Figment out, we hear the familiar voice of Fi, who is now an old, decrepit little guy, and he's used in the story to ground Dreamfinder and show that not everything he knows has changed. It is a little unfortunate because they don't really utilize him as a sound sprite anymore. He's sort of just another human character at this point, except he's blue. Determined to show the Academy that he is not out of touch, Blair shows off his dream machine's extraordinary power of, dream power, and destroys the top of the Academy and almost runs into the Epcot ball. It is here that we learn that the world has moved on from the power of imagination, and the campus is now powered by Spaceship Earth, which randomly appeared 30 years ago on campus. And this is where the comic gets a little high concept even for the most Disney diehard. As a quick aside, the Spaceship Earth attraction is a time machine, taking riders back to different forms of communication and technology throughout the years. But in this comic, it's the source of an all-new type of energy, replacing the dream energy that we saw save the world at the end of the first book. And if you see that I'm interchanging the words dream and imagination, the book kind of treats them as the same word, so I'm just gonna treat it as the same word. We're told that Spaceship Earth randomly disappears and reappears, but that's sort of the only hint we get about it being a time machine, and it feels a bit weird combining attractions like this for not much payoff, other than getting these two hotshot mascots in the same book, of course. Anyways, surrounded by all this newfangled technology, Dreamfinder begins to doubt his abilities as an inventor, afraid that he can't keep up if he has to be stuck in the future. Fi sees this doubt in him, and he convinces his old friend to give a presentation to the class to confirm that he's the whole reason that this academy still exists in the first place. And Fi gets the machine that Blair used to create Figment out of the academy's storage room for him to showcase in this presentation. However, the voices inside his head become a bit too loud, and his doubt fully takes over. And since he's wearing his machine, this doubt causes Spaceship Earth to disappear, and the manifestation of his doubt to take physical form, turning Dreamfinder into the Doubt Finder, who takes control of the whole school so everything can be ruled with order and a new Nightmare Nation can be established. Oh wait, this is starting to sound familiar. With Dreamfinder out of the picture, Figment has nowhere to turn to, so he escapes the campus and flies over the beautiful Florida coast in search of answers, when, all of a sudden, he sees one little spark of imagination out of the corner of his eye. This spark belongs to a little girl named Capri, who we've actually seen in little snippets of the comic beforehand, I just haven't really mentioned it before, and whose name is really hard to Google without bringing up a bunch of Mickey Mouse pants. She's a genius inventor who is trying her best to actually get into the academy despite her younger age. Dreamfinder also happens to be her distant uncle, which obviously means she has to go save him. He's family after all. So Figment and Capri rush back to the academy, which has been spookified by the mindless zombie students walking around around under Doubtfinder's control. There's even a nice little Disney villains reference thrown in there so you know it's spooky. Bro thinks he's part of the club. Capri and Figment are able to make it into the heart of the academy and put on Dreamfinder's machine to try and stop the Doubtfinder from spreading any further. And this actually springs her own imaginary friend into existence named Spark. Bro thinks he's part of the club. Spark only speaks in rhyme, which is about as charming as it sounds. And with the helmet in hand, or on head, I guess, the gang confronts Doubtfinder and uses the machine to dive into Blair's imagination soul. And it's here we end up learning his tragic backstory, where he grew up in poverty and none of his teachers let him use his creativity, deeming it unconstructive and lazy. After trekking through his imagination, they find the real Dreamfinder in a pool of his own doubt in the center of a doubt storm. And to break him free from the storm, Capri tells him how much of an inspiration he was to her, even all these years later, and that his legacy mattered to her. This fills Dreamfinder with newfound determination, and they use the helmet to return to the academy and stop Doubtfinder once and for all. The only problem is that he's looking a little more beast-like than when we left him. It's in this final moment that Dreamfinder realizes that it's not his inventions that hold power, but his imagination instead, smashing the machine and urging all the students to use their imagination to conjure up their own imaginary friend to take into combat, of course. And now that everyone has a Pokemon to battle with, the power of imagination overpowers the shadows of doubt, and the Doubtfinder is destroyed once and for all. Capri is finally let into the academy, the chairman allows imagination to thrive, and the Dreamfinder is offered a new job at the academy, which he politely declines. After all, he has a dream machine to build and a big ball to find, as Spaceship Earth still hasn't reappeared after the accident. Introducing Figment 3, the quest for the big ball. Is what I wish I could tell you was the next book, but it seems like this wasn't in the cards, as Figment 2 was the second to last story to release under the Disney Kingdoms line, and by this time the series still really hadn't found its footing. Overall, I find Figment 2 to be a bit too cluttered and unfocused to enjoy. I glossed over a lot of Capri's storyline, as she really is just Dreamfinder Jr., but without the interesting conflict, and overall I think it's hard to have a Disney Parks comic that is taken up mostly by an original character that's not even in the ride, that doesn't exist anymore. Even Figment takes a backseat in the story to make room for Capri and Spark, and he feels like more of a third wheel in his own story, a story that's convoluted enough as it is. I also feel like the presence of this story makes it feel like it can't flow as naturally into the original ride story as the ending of the first comic did, and the presence of real-life attractions such as Spaceship Earth that aren't even really related to the story besides being, you know, the two mascots of Epcot. It almost ruins the immersion in a way, making the buildings and the parks feel more literal, rather than an escape into the realms of imagination. Not that it really matters anymore, because you can't even ride the original ride the comic is based on, which I think is really what drags this comic down the most. Despite the changes and downgrades, Figment really remains one of the most popular Parks original characters to this day, and it's unfortunate to see his creator, the Dreamfinder, lost to obscurity, stuck in a ride that you can't ride anymore, and a kinda popular Marvel comic line. Outside of Parks merchandise, this series was really a place where Dreamfinder could have been rediscovered and revitalized. And while I feel like the original comic really had something there, I feel like Figment 2 did him no favors, retreading old story beats and not really giving us anything new besides some original characters that, quite frankly, are never going to appear outside of this book ever again. In a world where modern Disney is ready to eliminate all of their park original IPs in favor of the hip and marketable movie characters. I found a new appreciation for the original ride while I was researching this video, and it's been great to learn more about Dreamfinder and Figment as a duo, two characters that come from the same background, but with one left in obscurity. Now, I would love to see what you guys think down in the comments. Do you think Disney should bring back the original version of this ride? Of course, I couldn't cover everything that happened in these books in the span of one video, and I didn't really want this video to be a replacement for reading the comics, so if you guys have any interest, I urge you to read the comics for yourselves and form your own opinion, especially if you're missing that original ride and want a bit more Figment. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and if you made it this far, I'm so glad you enjoyed this video. If you enjoy weird deep dives into obscure media, I have more videos planned down the line, and here's a video to watch, right here, next to my face. Now, while you're busy clicking on that, I just saw a puff of magic out of the corner of my eye, and I think my duck just turned into a real imaginary creature. I gotta go check this out.